Okay.
There you go. It's recording in process. Really glad. I don't know. There. Okay, reset. We're really glad to be here with you today. Our parent organization is Truth Has a Voice Foundation. We started it about a year after we began Ark Valley Voice, the publishing group, and it has been our parent for the past year. We became a nonprofit news organization a year ago in August, although we began Ark Valley Voice in March of 2018, and by the end of the year, we started the foundation. The foundation has an educational and a civic purpose to it. So when the League of Women Voters suggested that we might cooperate on a program, we were very excited about that. Today is 9/11, which is significant for most of us in this room. For Stephen and I in particular, it actually changed the course of our careers. When 9/11 happened, I was the leader of Western Union North America Money Transfer. My product got used by the people who attacked the World Trade Center. I lost friends and associates in the Western Union office at the base of the World Trade Center. That day, if you recall, when we were all grilled on the screen and looking at what was happening during 9/11, I was also dealing with the fact that the banks had shut down and my product was being contacted by companies from all over this country trying to figure out how they were going to make payroll that week. We made payroll for more than a third of the corporations in America out of the product that I ran that week. It was a time when my compatriots all over the world were contacting us in Denver. Our offices were in Greenwood Village in Denver. They were contacting us all over the world saying, we're with you, whatever you need, we're with you. But it wasn't only a couple years later that I had felt drawn back into the journalism career that I had come and gone from a few times before, and I've remained a journalist since then. For some reasons that seemed rather obvious to me, perhaps not to you. For Stephen had been a member of the U.S. Marines. He had left, and he went back into the Marines in a second deployment overseas. So from where we stood, fighting for democracy, we think is a pretty good thing, and that's actually related to the topic for today. We're in the project area of our press room, by the way. So what you're looking at the screen is actually a part of our press room on it. So, and we put our notes in it. I didn't do this as PowerPoint, but Stephen does have some examples that he'll be showing to you when he gets to his part of the presentation. Our goal today is one sentence: to present a basis for civil discussion and fact-based discernment of the truth across a broad spectrum of issues faced in this country. In this era where questions are being raised about trust in our system of justice and in our elections, we think it's more important than ever as a people to have the tools to discern whether or not what we're hearing and seeing is accurate, is fair, represents the truth. According to the National Civics League, and we regularly take training ourselves as members of the National Civics League, Colorado Press Association, the Colorado News Collaborative, the Institute for Nonprofit News, and we were just asked to complete the 387-word, I think, application to become part of the Global Journalism Trust Initiative. So it actually is a very big deal. Almost did me in, though. What do you mean there's 387 questions to this? Okay, we'll fill it out. We'll fill it out. But the National Civics League webinar that we were all on a few weeks ago made a point that we think is very important. We're in a shift from the information age to a period of intense change The environment we're in, and I'm speaking about our global climate environment, along with the environment of information that we're in, is being subjected to extreme thinking and extreme events. And along with that, there's an outrage machinery, put that in quotation marks, if you will, that is threatening the anchors of civil society. And before we get into the problems this creates, and a lot of that Stephen will be presenting, we think we should probably understand how it came to be. There are three things that have impacted the information extremity that we are all experiencing right now. First, there was a change in broadcast rules. Broadcasting is no longer required to present both sides. That's what led us to a man like Rush Limbaugh. Limbaugh's talk radio programs weren't possible until the Federal Communications Commission relaxed the Fairness Doctrine. The Fairness Doctrine said that you had to present both sides of an issue if you were in radio or television, and of course, social media and being digital online has become part of the broadcast realm. That has led to one-sided coverage. So people who might listen and only tune in to one particular station or one news genre are only getting one side of the news. The second thing that happened was the Citizens United Supreme Court decision in 2010. And Citizens United equated companies to people, and it brought an avalanche of money into the political system. It was a landmark decision because until then, people were people and companies were companies, and now people, companies, it's an avalanche, and we're all still continuing dealing with it. And the third thing that has been there all along, but has become worse over time, is the political campaigns have a rule change exception. And that means that they don't have to substantiate the claims that they make. If they want to call their opponent a bully, if they want to say he or she is a liar or a cheater or something, they can say it. And they can say it with no retribution. There's nothing coming at them saying, what's the substantiation for the claims that you're making? That is actually the opposite of how we operate. And most ethical news organizations who are members of the Colorado Press Association and the Institute for Nonprofit News, we require claim substantiation for the comments and things that we allow people to write to us as letters to the editor. We require our reporters to have claim substantiation with the information that they're putting in. What's the source? As Stephen and our reporter Carly Winchell, who covers BB's at the back of the room, and she's heard me say before, what's the source for what you're writing about? But political campaigns don't have to do that. Now, when men were men and ladies were ladies, I guess truth held sway, but these days, not necessarily. Not necessarily. We talked about outrage machinery, and this applies first and foremost to social media these days. It's heightening our sense of isolation, but it's also making it far too easy to spout fearful and hateful things. Sometimes at 10 o'clock at night or 6 a.m. in the morning, or whenever we see something, we just put it out there. Well, I won't include me in that. I'm rarely on social media. That's a mental health thing, by the way. But social media is a hotbed of it. And because there are so many different kinds of social media out there right now, the situation is becoming worse, not better. Second, outreach machinery, as we all know, because you're the League of Women Voters of Chaffee County, it applies to politics, and it's increasing the divide used to be bridged by civil debate. What happened to civil debate? Let's bring it back, we think, and hopefully you all agree. Because we don't have it right now, it prevents the public from actually acquiring facts and information to make up their own minds about an issue. Other people are telling them you need to believe this. It may be true or not, but believe it because I said so. It also feeds domestic terrorism. And domestic terrorism is the #1 threat right now according to the Department of Justice here. 22 years ago on 9/11, it was terrorism coming from the international scene, and that is no longer the number one threat. It also is feeding the normalization of violence and increasing hostility to the press. This is feeding on growing trust issues that underlie attitudes for a whole list. And I'll put the whole list up on the screen there. I'm sure all of you can add to it. Vaccines, COVID-19. There's a flat earth movement. Go figure. The Colorado snowpack, is it going to be enough or too much? The 2020 election, reproductive health, climate change, and add local issues that we've got going on right now. Wildfire danger, water issues, energy use and resources, and even the gun-toting guy in Salida that we've been reporting on. This has led to attacks verbally so far, although there's been, was it the FBI office in Ohio, Stephen, that got attacked? Right. Yeah. This has led to attacks on democracy and the rule of law itself by those who don't bother to read the whole Constitution or to understand the role of the Department of Justice. Our rule of law and our democracy is the envy of the world. Attacks on it will hurt all of us. Successful attacks on it would destroy our country. In the media, there's also been changes that you should all be aware of when it comes to disinformation. Acquisitions by hedge funds are rampant across all of the major news organizations in this country. This is stripping resources out of newsrooms. It's creating a nationalized and capitalistic viewpoint. I'm going to repeat it. A nationalistic and capitalistic viewpoint that is coming through in a lot of our major media. It is gutting investigative journalism. Covering massive issues from climate change, global pandemics, news elections takes a lot of resources. Newsrooms are not profit centers of the media. They are expense centers because it takes time to go do the digging. As Stephen knows, as the investigative reporter for Ark Valley Voice, it takes a lot of time to get at information. At the same time, there's been a rise in nonprofit news media. We are a part of that movement. Increasingly, we have found that it is a better position and place for news media to be if you actually are a real journalist on it. We don't endorse political candidates. We generally don't endorse major issues unless they are supportive of democracy. As I have been heard to say, and Stephen has also been heard to say, when we have done talks around the community, and we have done many of them, there is one bedrock principle that Ark Valley Voice and Truth Has a Voice Foundation stands on, and that is because we stand for democracy. This is not an option to think of any other choice. We will stand for democracy. We chose the side. Sometimes in our crew meetings, by the way, at Ark Valley Voice, we're a crew, also a team, but we go by crew. We have been known to bring up quite frequently, and if no one else does, Stephen does, to remind us that what we're looking at this point in time in this country is very akin to the 1930s in Europe and the rise of fascism. We need to be paying all of us attention to that. That is not an exaggeration, right, Stephen? It's not an exaggeration. So we need to be paying attention to that. And that goes hand in hand with the fact that there's increased hostility to the press. And there's increasing attacks on the Department of Justice, the U.S. election system, as well as anyone with a different viewpoint on it. And that takes us to the three definitions that will introduce this section that Stephen will go into. We actually look at the definitions related to disinformation this way. Misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. Let me go back over those three. Misinformation can just be something that somebody got wrong on social media, and there's no intent to harm anybody. There's no intent to cause a problem. It's just that somebody got it wrong. You know, great Aunt Ethel heard something somewhere, repeated it, and doesn't know if it's true or not. And there's nothing horrible about that unless it spreads and becomes something bigger and bigger. Disinformation not only is not true, but it's disseminated purposely to seed non-factual opinions and attitudes. In other words, it's a marketing campaign. No, I don't mean that wrong. I've been in marketing. I spent a lot of time in product management. But what it is it's a continuous campaign that is purposely spreading something that is not true. That doesn't mean anybody's going to get hurt by it. It could mean that one candidate wins and one candidate doesn't. But it doesn't mean that it's going to cause physical harm. Malinformation, however, is a completely different category, and its intent is to cause harm and damage, and it's dangerous. And we're seeing more and more of it out there. And oftentimes there's illegal results related to that as well. The sources of disinformation and weaponization, I've got them listed up here. Stephen's going to get into them a little bit more and show you some examples of some of the things that are happening. So I'm going to leave the floor to Stephen to start.
All right. Yes, I'm Stephen Hall. I do have a law enforcement background as well. So I love to take questions about that. I spent 7 years in the Border Patrol, federal side, and then an additional 4 and some change, and as a state trooper here in this county and also in Fremont County. And it's always a pleasure to help people understand, and I often work with people in consulting a lot of the groups around here. I was just speaking with Margie, as a matter of fact, just to help you all understand some of the legal side and some of the police side as a matter of fact as well. So this part, as Jen was just talking about, is going to get into the nuts and bolts or the weeds of this. And we'll start with, how many of you all are on the internet? Not right now necessarily, but keep your hands up, please. So how many are on the internet? How many are on social? And you can put your hand down as you more than so you have like you have
Just put it in the chat.
all the ones that,
Stephen, can you move behind the microphone?
oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I get a little bit involved in it. So you have even the ones that pretty much are just sharing pictures are social media. So unfortunately, believe it or not, you are in an information war, and you are behind. Anytime you're on the internet or any of those, you're behind enemy lines. I can't think of any other way to describe it, and that's how my military law enforcement background has come to know it. Is and you really, especially these days, should treat it as such, because there are huge drivers, and Jan was briefly talking about that. We won't get too much into that, but because I had to condense this into a portion that we can allow for a lot of comment and a lot of questions, because the world is changing very fast, and really we're in uncharted territory when it comes to how information is being used against us, and not only that, how we are being used as unwitting pawns. So let's start with some basic psychological drivers behind misinformation and disinformation. Okay, and the first one, these are a couple of terms. I'm gonna hit these terms right now, and these are psychological terms, and they're also theories. Well, one of them is a theory, and there's a whole. Like I said, we could speak for hours on these things. I'll hit them right now. We'll come back to it when we get into more of the examples. Okay. So let's start with the first one. which is confirmation bias. Has anybody heard of confirmation bias? Okay, so good. That's really good because essentially, anytime you're on any social media platform, you're going to get confirmation how their algorithms work. And believe it or not, algorithms were the first AI.
You gotta stay behind your computer. Sorry.
Before that, before before that, we had algorithms, and truly that was the first AI. And basically, what those do, if you don't know, is they're really complicated programs that take your clicks and your interactions anywhere on the internet, anywhere, literally, and they process that and feed it back to you in things that they think you're going to like based on your profile that they have built. And you have no control over this, unfortunately. Believe it or not, you don't. That's why I say you're behind enemy lines, because you're there and you have to be very aware of it. So we'll just look for the basic definition really quick here so everybody knows. And all of this, as you can see, is really easy to look up and pass on to anybody else in your sphere of influence. So it's people's tendency to process information by looking for or interpreting information that is consistent with their beliefs or their existing beliefs. This biased approach to decision-making is largely unintentional, and it results in a person ignoring information that is inconsistent with their beliefs. This is my daughter, Remy. You don't have to. So if any of you, all of you or most of you had your hand up and at least probably have some familiarity with social media, that is essentially social media, is confirmation bias. And unfortunately, it is on a massive scale with billions of dollars behind it. So then we'll move to the second one really quick here. And that is cognitive dissonance. Is everybody familiar with the term cognitive dissonance? All right. Well, we'll just go over it really quick to make sure everybody's on the same page. Basically, it's everybody has conflict within them, especially when they're dealing with issues or events that create that conflict, where your beliefs are one side, but the incident is on another, and it creates a conflict within you. That's all normal. However, when that conflict is overrode by an outside force, where you do not take the information being presented as the fact that it is, or you choose other information purposefully and create basically your own little world, which again is a lot of social media, that is cognitive dissonance. And it's not unusual, and it's happened for a long time. But again, with these large drivers, and we're going to get into what that kind of looks like here in just a minute, these large, very powerful drivers behind it, meaning social media companies, malicious actors that have a lot of money, that want to push an agenda. All of those create and reinforce your own reality. And if you continue to choose that reality, then that reality becomes you. And anything trying to penetrate it is essentially the bad guy. And as you can see there, that's a very simple diagram of it. There's the conflict. The person's smoking the cigarette, but the family's over there, doesn't want them to see it. So how can you reduce it? Well, you can try certain strategies, like for example, the sucker or whatnot, or seek out new information, reducing the help. Well, the cognitive dissonance comes in play when everything telling you to do the right thing is not the right thing. Does that make sense? Anyways, we'll move on to that in just one moment. So that's the psychological drivers behind this, the main psychological drivers behind what's happening in disinformation and misinformation and why it's so deleterious or damaging to our society right now. What that has produced is a arena, or like we were talking about, being behind enemy lines, or a ecosystem. Has anybody heard about a social media, or not the social media, but an ecosystem of information? There has been created a false ecosystem of information out there, mostly online, but that ecosystem allows these people who get sucked into it, or even us. I mean, we're all victims of it, probably every day if you're on it. It's just your ability to break out of it and seek out the source information, what Jan was just talking about, is crucial to staying out of that ecosystem that will give you confirmation bias all the way till you're cognitively, until that's a cognitive dissonance. Does everybody understand how that kind of might work in this case, even though it's a grander view and a more clinical view of how it happens? Well, now we're going to get into what that looks like when it comes out on our end. So we were just talking about the cognitive drivers of it. And let's see. Did I see that? So this next figure here, can everybody see that all right? We'll start with the cognitive drivers up there, what we were just talking about. So there's the false beliefs in the middle. Those are beliefs that are based on falsehoods, lies, and there's plenty of them out there. The main parts of that are going to be, as you can see, lack of analytical thinking and or deliberation. One of the best college courses I ever had, critical thinking. Critical thinking skills are so important when dealing with this kind of information that allows you to continually think critically about issues and situations and break out of it. I say break out of it because often that's what we end up trying to do for folks that get caught in it, and what psychologists like to do. The cognitive failures are negligent source cues, neglect. That means the people neglect source cues and or knowledge, and they forget source and or counter evidence. That's where social media is so debilitating to people's ability to critically think, because they are constantly barraged by false cues that are made to look real. And you'll see some of that in just a minute. Then the illusory truth, which is, think of it as an escalation to cognitive dissonance, which is your own reality that is based in falsehood. And that's familiarity, fluency. Once you get really familiar with it, you feel good because everybody in your group or your social media circle feel good about it, whatever you're talking about, even if it is the outrage machine, which is what they're turning in to be mostly. It just creates more and more outrage. And we'll go to the socio-affective drivers. This part is changing rapidly, and this part we'll spend a little bit more time on, and I'm sure there will be even more examples as we go. Elites in group, again, that's the attractive part. They make it very attractive to be parts of certain groups on these platforms, as well as just on the internet as a larger group. The emotive information and emotional state. That's what we're talking about with the outrage machines. Now we want to go to the worldview, personal views. As we get into this AI world, I don't know if any of you have seen it. I don't have any good examples because they're very good, because you can't tell the difference. AI is creating images and pictures and movies that are completely fake, and they will take actors or they'll take people and make them look real. And that's where we're at. And that's where I say we're in uncharted territory, and I don't necessarily have the answers for that right now. We're all trying to figure it out. But I do believe that the basics of the fact-based reality, keeping a hold of that, critical thinking skills, education, and just challenging yourself, challenging your beliefs. Probably one of the best things that happened to me, I grew up here and I was very sheltered, I will admit it. And then when I went into the Marine Corps, it was a culture shock. And a lot of my basic core beliefs, which were fairly conservative at the time, because it's just a lot of what happens out here, growing up in a ranching family and whatnot, were challenged. They were challenged by new people, new events, new cultures. And then similarly, then when we traveled around the world as a deployed Marine, those got constantly challenged. That's another thing what we can do mostly for our youth to keep those where you balance, you take this thing that challenges your belief and you balance it and you figure out, okay, do I want to adopt some of that or not? Those are just some skills that I've learned over my life, as an example. We'll move on to the next part of why it's so hard to break some folks out of it. So on the right, you see the selective retrieval. Those are more the psychological terms. The myth is large, as you can see. The correction is small because truths usually come out as a trickle after the myth has blown up. And as, again, the outrage drivers continue to reinforce that myth, the facts trickle out slowly. And that myth stays large, the facts stay small. That doesn't always happen that way, but the system is designed that way. I don't, again, unfortunately don't have an answer for that because we're dealing with very large and well-funded companies that are pushing that upon us. If some of you have seen, there's a new project coming out to help protect our youth and our young ones from what was that, Project Liberty, I believe. I would recommend looking into that because it's a group trying to get Congress, the U.S. Congress, to protect our youth online. Just exactly what we were talking about here and how it's so damaging. Thank you. So that's the nutshell. That shows you the psychological drivers and what the ecosystem is basically supported by and built on. Let's look at some examples. And I apologize for driving through this so fast because like I said, we could spend hours on it, but I want to save a lot of time for both Jan and I want to save a lot of time for questions. All right. These are actual images and misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation that we had to deal with very early on, particularly with the first iteration of the Chaffee County Patriots. For example, what do you think that one would fall under? Call to arms, Antifa and BLM, Black Lives Matters. This was one that was occurring during the Black Lives Matter protests. And this was broadcast to hundreds of people on one site, and it was reused and reused. That's malinformation. This one's a very good example here. So this image right here, as you can read it, as you can see here, it has a name and then it has when you are 24, break into a 70-year-old's house and threaten him and his wife with a knife, and didn't know he was a boxer, a U.S. Marine, and a hand-to-hand combat instructor. Semper Fi. This was used in 2020. That image was actually used, that original image was from 2008. That old man is a British man. He was a boxer, yes, and he was a soldier, but he was not a U.S. Marine. The other man that got beat up was did not break into his house, was a drunk on the outside. But that's a perfect example of how, and that particular image, if you do a reverse image search, which is kind of technical, but you can't do that, especially with Google now, you'll find out how many times it's been used. That thing's been used since 2008 in various ways. This is just one example of how they've used it to evoke that outrage machine, to provide some kind of fodder for whatever political movement. These are, and it, unfortunately, it requires you a lot of extra time if you're just trying to be out there and get information to go to the source of these. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in. We'll just do a couple more and then we'll open it up for some questions and discussion here, guys. If any of you have seen, thankfully, they started doing this. So it provides a false information. Has anybody ever seen some of those? Don't reshare them. That's the whole point of, and I appreciate the social media platforms trying that, but the point is don't reshare them. Or I've seen people go to lengths of dispelling them completely. Like, look, this is BS, and trying to stop it in its tracks. Here's a really great one. This was about, now this one is just a malicious information, and it's covered in our, particularly in the youth platforms, youth rooms, we'll call them the virtual rooms that a lot of them gravitate to online. Like Reddit is a platform, but there's also many rooms if you're familiar. And we can get into a lot of those later. Again, I gotta try and keep it as short as we can, but here's an example of they're using an actor, as we know, John Hamm, and the image of, let's face it, the white man with his drink, and a 17-year-old talking about Kyle Rittenhouse and how he dropped 3 rioters, killed them. Well, he only ended up killing 2 of them, but injured another one. Well, what do you think 5 or 6 combat vets? This was in order to get people to that action phase, which we're starting to see. And the action phase is what we're starting to see a lot more, where these memes, does everybody know what a meme is? Mm-hmm. It's a picture like this that has words on it. They use either an actor or they use something that is influential to your brain and tapping into your brain to get you to have an emotional response. Now they want them to turn into action. And okay. I'm glad it's not scary. With that, I mean, like I said, we could go on for hours, but I do want to keep it open.
That's one of them.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, she has one more part, and then we'll move on.
Your other page. One thing when he talked about how do you know information is true or not? If you go to the Ark Valley Voice .com site and you go to the upper right corner, if you're on a laptop, or scroll down a ways if you're on a mobile phone, and put in fact dash checking in quotation marks and hit the search button. Everything we've ever written that includes information about how to fact check things, how to discover the truth. Stories will come up. And I'm thinking perhaps, I'm just going to scroll down to the one we did in December 2020. It was December 31st. December 31st, 2020. And in that story, we provided, I don't think I am magic. Fact-based though. If you scroll down to the sources we use, what we did is we provided a list for you in the public, some fact-checking sources that we use, whether or not it's words or information or the kind of images that Stephen was talking about. One of the sources we really like is the AP Fact Check. We like factcheck.org. We have a whole list of these in there, but those are probably the top ones that we use. We also have access to Media Bias Fact Check, and by including this for you members of the public, you can go directly to these sources and check like a media fact, or the AFP Fact Checker is a larger international agency, and it is also particularly good at the kind of thing Stephen was describing, where they've superimposed a photo from a whole completely different source, a different era, and they've dropped it in to make a fake image, a fake piece of information, and that AFP Fact Check picks it up really good. I won't go through all of those at the time, but you can go directly to it and find that and get into several of the things that
And that's on your website.
that's on our website, yeah. And if you go in, there's several organizations. I've got to get out of the media back into projects. Stephen, where did you? You're in our press room, by the way. You're literally looking at the press room that we use as we write. Where did you put projects? Here it is. Sorry, guys. We're digital, so the press room is wherever we are. Got it. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. There's one other exercise that I'm trying to, that we want to share with you. We've got a few minutes, and then we'll save for questions. I'm going to go down to I'm going to go to this. Margie, I think you or Suzanne mentioned Braver Angels. We've actually done Braver Angels training for some of us inside Ark Valley Voice. And I have an exercise that I'd like to use with all of you. Stephen, if you can see if that paper can get handed around. We're going to divide the room into a few groups, but instead of doing that, let me just, well, yeah, we can just let them hand out. I don't know if I have enough for everybody. So part of what Bravery Angels does is, Margie had mentioned the red and blue sort of side of things. We looked at it a little different, coming at it from media getting trained. And you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to, but think about these questions. How many of you identify as open-minded, accepting, even liberal? Here, raise your hand. Okay. How many of you think of yourself as a conservative? You can, it's okay. You know, and then how many of you on both sides identify as moderate? Okay. Now, that's a mindset that you have, and it also might be a purposeful decision that you make. Try and through things and take a stance on it. The reason I wanted you to do that is because this exercise involves you inhabiting the head as somebody who's the exact opposite of you. Exact opposite of you. And what do they think of you? I'm taking this, I'm presenting this as a political tone, but who are liberal, people who are conservative, people who consider themselves moderate in the middle, tend to use different words about that. So what would someone the exact opposite of you say, sir, you're a liberal? What would a conservative say about someone who's a liberal? In a handbasket. In a handbasket, right? say, yeah, that you're a conservative. What would a liberal say? Take a few minutes and just write down some words about what you think the person. Well, that has to. You are exactly right about that. What we used to consider as conservative isn't necessarily what we're seeing be exhibited right now. So use your own imagination and what would that definition of conservative say about you?
I have another question, because I'm conservative on some things and liberal on others. So it's not, I'm leaning on. I'm in the middle on my.
So they'd say, make up your mind, right? Yeah.
I might fit in.
Mm-hmm.
Jan, I can't understand any of the questions. If you can.
And Stephen, come up here.
No, I mean
Karen
from the
can't.
audience.
Gordon.
I would say, for the purposes of this exercise, which is really good, I would say use the ones that you think are going on now and what they could look like or used to look like when the sides were more reasonable.
Yes, sir.
Well, politics are the biggest driver now. I think you can put it.
But there are other things. That's true. How many
Probably.
people do you know who believe that climate change is real? Think about that. Or how many people do you know now who say, I'm not getting those vaccines, it's a plaque. You know, I mean, think about, I mean, that is taking things to extreme, but that's the example of what we were sharing with you about the extreme thinking that is taking over. By the way, the new term for climate change is extreme weather. Extreme weather. I'm true. I'm true. I've been in training webinars with the Institute for Nonprofit News, where we have been from journalists from several parts of the country have talked about how do we talk about what is happening all around us that we're seeing. And the woman who was in charge of the climate office for the city of New Orleans said, I call it extreme weather. And a few people said, we'd call it a lot more than that if we lived in New Orleans. Yes. Natural life form.
Is that right?
I'd love to see what they say about
I'm
reproductive.
actually have not even heard that yet. Thank you. I like to learn new stuff myself.
Natural life. Mhm.
What you would think
What
they'd
you
say.
think they'd say about you? What you think that the people opposite of you would say about you? Just put down some words. It'll take a few minutes. Just a couple more minutes. We're hoping that those words come to you very clearly.
So Jan, if you're asking them to repeat, you're going to have to repeat it because the microphone isn't picking up the people behind that.
Yes, they're not talking yet. They're writing.
I know. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Is that, let's take about 30 or 45 more seconds. Jean looks like she knows. Okay, anyone want to share? And I'll repeat the words so we get them into the tape. Yes, Wendy. Okay, so that Wendy said they did the combination here, anti-police, bleeding hearts, baby killer, socialists, atheists, okay, woke. I still don't know what that means. Yeah, okay. Tax and spendthrifts. Okay, Margie, did you have one? Woke. Well, I still, okay, yes. Emotional. You know, yes. Green. Green's a good color. Yes.
Uninformed.
Uninformed. Okay, yes. Anti-business, anti-corporation. Okay, you do know that the organizing principle of this country is democracy, not capitalism, right? Not everybody knows that these days. Yes, you had one.
I'm a good role.
Lost my faith. Wow. Unchristian. Interesting. And, actually, we haven't even gotten into what Christian nationalism is doing there. I will tell you that my husband and I made a trip last fall to Branson, Missouri, and I came back seriously concerned about the faith in Middle America. Yeah. There's another saying that my mom used to tell me when I was trying to reason with my 2-year-old. She said, Janice, my full name is Janice, not just Jan. She said, your 2-year-old is being emotional and you're being logical. There is no communications taking place. Think about that. So a lot of the phrasing that you were all using were all emotional terms. In fact, since I asked you to use adjectives, they're bound to be emotional on it. But if you think about it, there's so much emotion that's being ramped up. Outrage machinery that Stephen and I have been describing here is bound to do that to people. So emotions become higher and higher and there's no outlet. What's the solution to that? It requires new glasses. What I can tell you, I was going to say that your answers were telling me that we're not all one thing or another. And I do agree with you, since I tend to be someone who's more moderate, although I swear most of the public reading thinks maybe I'm not. But there are things that I am a lot more moderate about and things that I'm not. So you're right. We're not all one thing or the other. And because we are not, there is some hope. We don't want to leave you hopeless about this. So is there any truth in the stereotypes that the people that you were thinking of while you were making this list? Is there any truth in the stereotypes? Let's be honest here. Let's be honest with ourselves. Think? Yeah. So it's not all fake. There's some honesty, but in many cases, as you have been described by those people who may not agree with you, these are positions that you have either thought through or decided to take, we hope, because you become informed. you bothered to pay attention to the issues, that you bothered to do that you haven't just taken those positions from a purely emotional stance because some entity has, what was that?
Truly listen.
That you truly have listened. Listening, by the way, is one of the things about where to go from here. Because when you peel back the opinions, when you peel back what they have to say, if you find some truth in those stereotypes, you're looking at a difference in perspectives. And so if we get better at simply listening to those perspectives, it doesn't mean we have to agree with the perspectives being presented to all of us, but we can lower the temperature of society, of our civil society. There is a definition of civil going on here. We can lower the temperature just by letting people say something and then ultimately saying, you know, let's just agree that we're going to disagree. Let's just agree that we're going to disagree and see if that can lower the temperature something. Most people really just want to be heard. Even people we disagree with, they just want to be heard. And so part of the role that we've been trying to do is to stay with facts and information and help point that out as Truth as a Voice Foundation, the educational and the civics educational arm of what we do. What? Yeah.
A little anecdote that I often tell friends or family. One piece of this emotion we're talking about that's left out, particularly in the outrage machine, is empathy. And empathy is a huge leveler, let's call it a leveler of high emotion on one side. Having empathy, whether you agree or disagree, having empathy. Listening, like active listening, which is a huge part of critical thinking, or critical thinking skills, is where empathy starts. Just listening and say, oh, okay, well, I've been in that situation before. I may not agree with it now, but I can empathize with that. And one of the anecdotes is when I was a cop, I used to get kind of a hard time because I'm kind of a softie. I like people. I like to help people. That's why I was a cop. But I still took them to jail. I was empathetic all the way to jail. They still went to jail, but I was just nice to them. I was empathetic the whole way. You can still accomplish your job and be empathetic. You can still be firm and empathetic.
And as journalists, we often report on things that doesn't mean we don't have empathy for the people, but that's why we stick to the facts. We don't call them names. We don't use adjectives. In fact, another thing that the reporters of Ark Valley Voice used to be saying is get rid of the adjectives and the prepositional phrases. I'm like, get rid of the prepositional phrases. You don't need the extra words, and don't use adjectives. If he's dead, he's dead. He's not really dead. He's just dead. Yeah. Okay.
And not very good. But the same is hope. Listen, and for the listeners, some of the things.
The comment is about listening. Those of you who on screen maybe couldn't see this, that these days we aren't good listeners. This is true. We say to kids, put the listening ears on, but we're really not good listeners as adults. That's partly because we're all trying to talk over each other right now as a society, and that's not good.
I think also to go back, and that's why it's good to understand the technical side of it, which we were describing earlier, the psychological terms, where you have the confirmation bias and the cognitive dissonance, and understanding where perhaps somebody is along that line helps you know whether you can actually maybe break in there and literally say, hey, put your listening ears on. Versus the person who's just shouting and you're not gonna, and you should shut it down because it will only get worse.
One suggestion that we have occasionally found useful in journalism, because we sometimes have people in to talk, groups of people in to talk to us. We just had some of the business owners in Salida in for coffee one morning to talk about what's been happening on F Street. When you do that kind of thing and people may have differing opinions, sometimes it's good to help them put their listening ears on by having a baton that you pass to the person who is going to be the one who gets a chance to talk, and no one else can talk while the other one's got the baton. So trying some steps like that can make adults act like adults. You had a question, ma'am.
You know. One society, very. When it's a unity, right up. There are all these people in Esther. I mean, why should we? Then, you know, all listening and tree hugging and would everybody pray comes out the back door. I can walk into a store, that's and there's not in the back of my head.
The question in it, hang on a second, Stephen. The question has to do with, when does fear come into play by those of us who are regular, moderate, and mild-mannered people get afraid to be able to walk into a store, and the references to the man who's been wandering with a gun on F Street in Salida. So when does the community concern take over? Well, it comes into the statute that Stephen probably knows word by word. And the word alarm, when society is alarmed, there is a Colorado statute that takes over. Stephen, you want to present a little bit more, and then stay tuned for what will be happening next on that.
Unfortunately, that is a very large and difficult conflict. We like not both literal and figuratively, like you're describing. What was your name, ma'am? I'm sorry.
My name's Rose.
Rose. That we have to contend with. My opinion, based on my experience and particularly my care for my community, because the reason I do these things is because I care about my community. It was the same when I was a police officer, and that is, we have to put pressure on our leaders, and we have to engage in things like this. This is why it's so awesome in that schedule of events you have that are confronting some of these difficult things, because the glue that is holding this together, all of it, is fear. The reason those people are carrying their guns is fear. It's misplaced fear, for sure, through cognitive dissonance and all that stuff we've talked about, but it is their own fear of the liberals or whatever it is. The only problem is that fear then is flipped because it's a legitimate fear of a very dangerous weapon. And I think the best way to do it is this civic engagement that so few people have involved themselves with lately, and also an understanding of civics, because that same document that these people are using against us, I'm literally the Constitution, we can use for us, and the police can use for us legally and rightfully, and they're not, to be quite honest with you. This guy in Salida is a perfect example. And I don't attribute it to them being bad in any way. It's just, it's a misguided. We have to take back that control of it.
As Stephen has mentioned in one of his past articles, and as I've raised, if you actually read the whole Constitution, not just the Second Amendment part of it, there are multiple references to safety and security and happiness as the citizens of this country. There's only one reference in the Second Amendment, which has mostly been misplaced because it also refers that you have a right to bear arms as part of a well-regulated militia. And the well-regulated militias of this country are our National Guard.
I mean, cool, and like, that is what happened literally in Congress to renew the well-regulated militia part of Constitution. And it was called the Dick Act, or the National Guard Act. And it was in 1903. Again, this is all the research I've done so much on it, and it's kind of infuriating, very frustrating to see it being misused and placed in the wrong hands. And Congress updated the militias in our country, because at that time they were pretty much good old boy groups. The literal militias that started our country were reaffirmed and updated in 1903 with the Dick Act, and that created the National Guard. That's it. Now, granted, our lovely modern Supreme Court has passed some laws that, or not passed some laws, had made some interpretations that are very conflicting with that, and we are dealing with the consequences of that. We are seeing right now.
When it comes to the gun laws that have been passed by our legislature in the last couple of years, other than a ban on assault weapons, all three of the gun laws that have been passed about raising the age to buy a gun, the 3-day waiting period, and background checks have been tied up in court by the Rocky Mountain Gun Owners Association. They've written it out. Yes. Well,
Yeah, and if this was like some of the courses I've been to, if it was a full day, which really we should spend a full day on this probably, but that's okay. But the simplest thing to do is go to Google, and whatever you are searching, you type in, and that's what I do when I'm writing. If I see a claim, or I see a fact, so to speak, I'll just type into Google, whatever that is, false. And Google will spit out whether it's actually false or not, generally. There are, of course, plenty of fact-checking groups. The other thing I do, so I go as close to the source of whatever I'm researching as I possibly can. Often it requires me to read really technical statistical journals, but those are peer-reviewed and scientifically based, almost invariably. And it takes a while. That's what's unfortunate, is it takes a while to get to the source of all of these things.
yeah.
That's if you're sourcing something. Now, if it's something that somebody said, that's when I do the Google thing. And then the other thing is keeping in mind, journalism. We got away from journalism for a long time. Journalism, if it's done correctly, and a reputable company, which most of them are,
Us.
cares about that stuff, and they go to great lengths, and they usually have a bio, and they usually have a statement, a mission statement, letting people know that this is how we do journalism. And you find those outlets, you find those groups, for example, AP, Reuters, a lot of them that are kind of the middle of the road, but they have gone back to the journalistic roots like we have, to ensure that we go to great lengths to make sure that what you're getting is good quality information.
Wendy?
Just wanted to say, national, what I go to is called allsides.com. News sources. Right, and then there are ones designed by.
Yes.
That's the one.
Yeah, I've used it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and So I just prefer to see,
Mhm.
you know, so that's something that I use. I actually, I have that.
Eileen, the social. Yeah. Yeah.
Personally, that's where. That's more or less where I started getting the idea
The
that
question was what do you think of the film Social Dilemma?
I definitely watch it, and you get a little feel for the size and scope of what we are up against, and more importantly, what our children are up against. Every day they go online, like literally every day. You're behind enemy lines when you go online. Yeah, these are the people that built these things.
Yeah.
And it's just shocking. Thank you, Anne. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually have had an experience just recently. This week we'll be putting up the new story. We have two new student interns who are just coming on board from Crest Academy. They are 8th graders and they're doing a year-long internship with us as we will be teaching them journalism. One of them does have a phone and the other one does not have a mobile phone. And when we asked, is this temporary or when you're going to get one? And she said, I have no idea. I don't know if I need one. So that's good. Yeah, so we'll be putting up that story this week. You had a question. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Let me tell you a story about my first experience with AI. We were in, the question is about AI and hedge funds investment in artificial intelligence and what it is. We were discussing it in our weekly meeting with the Colorado News Collaborative that we're part of. It includes 70 or 80 news media, including broadcast, digital, which we are, and print and radio from all over the state. And Jim, who runs the Associated Press office at the Buell Media Center in downtown Denver, was one who had just done some experiments with it. And he said, well, let me tell you my experience with AI, and you can tell me whether or not you think it actually can get the facts straight. He said, I plugged into AI a request to create a news story. And he said, I took it from, literally ripped it from the pages of our own local paper, the Denver Post. It was the students who got on the overpass and threw rocks down on top of the cars and killed someone in the cars. He said, so I said, give me a story about this and the students and what's happened to them. And he said, an AI came back to me with a story. Only instead of saying the story was in Denver, Colorado, they said it happened in Dallas, Texas. He said, so there's a spot when you use AI to create something where you put in, no, you need to correct this. So he said, 3 times I tried to put in that this had happened in Denver, Colorado. And AI kept saying that it had happened in Dallas, Texas. So the head of our Colorado News Collaborative, Laura Frank, said, so Jim, what's your conclusion over AI? He said, I'm not using it for Associated Press. They got to get the bugs out. I mean, a story that it's supposed to create, because that's what AI does. It'll create images for you. It'll create news stories. Hedge funds are going to use it to gut newsrooms, by the way. That's exactly what they're going to do. Right? But if they can't get the facts straight, how can you trust it? We're not using it. Yeah.
No.
online and message on stuff that sounds like it's something I need to take care of right away. Financial. Never. They don't open anything.
That's a good plan.
You know, I just immediately trash it.
Mhm.
And then, but it's hard for people to then communicate with you if they can't do it by phone or they can't do it on the internet. And I find it really frustrating. Like, example might be your Amazon account has been frozen or got trying to look at something else.
They do.
It's really frustrating to waste your time. Constantly. Really, it sounds good. I assume that I'll see something else, like UPS, because I get the same one. But it's really, and my to all the honesty happen from all of the,
None of us should be. I think.
and it's my shooting. That's
All the way around. Yeah.
One comment. All of our examples and mode. It becomes you've said about all this stuff coming in on my internet feed. Now, the guy over in, but if I hear about it, and so peak becomes normal, and that is the problem. Of what January 6th was all about. And it becomes normalized. Let's move on.
There is an element that wishes that we all would move on. I frankly am refusing to move on from
Before, we don't have the answers here, and I'm just very appreciative that we can discuss it because this is the beginning of perhaps changing it. But one of the biggest difficulties we have now is covering this stuff and without normalizing it, because the more you cover it, the risk you take of normalizing it. And that's a constant battle, especially when I'm dealing with controversial things, which is usually what I'm dealing with.
yeah.
But I always want to keep, and that's why we need to keep going back to our leaders. It sucks for them because this is a very difficult time to be a leader anywhere.
That's their job.
They chose it. And I had to do that when I was a leader in the Marine Corps in a combat zone. It's just, you're the person. You got to make the decision. And we got to put some pressure on them with help. We got to be there to support them, of course. But keep the absurd absurd. It needs to remain absurd. A person standing with an assault rifle on F Street is absurd, and it needs to stay that way. And there are laws that allow us to stop it. It has nothing to do with the person's right to own a gun. It's absurd and dangerous, and it needs to stay that.
One thing that we pay attention to very carefully, if you actually analyze how we have covered that going on, is we in the news media cannot platform these people. We can't platform them, which is why when we have covered it, we have never quoted this man. It's not our job to quote him. He's certainly yelling at other people out there, but we do not quote them. Any kind of extremism that we're covering, we don't give them that kind of time of day. We have to cover it because it's happening. It's news. It has to be covered, but it needs to be covered related to the context of the fact that these are not normal times and these are not normal people and these are not normal circumstances.
The thing, I mean, I don't want to, I mean, this thing in Salina has got me real upset. So I've been to the city council meeting. They indicated they're not going to do anything about it. This guy's been standing on another corner, Highway 50 and 291 for 2 years, terrorizing all of the people that live in that area, including a dear friend of mine. So he's escalated, in my opinion. He's gone to a much more place with a megaphone and so on and so forth. And I honestly do not think that any of us that live in Salida should say this is normal. Or that
We
this
agree.
is okay.
We agree with you.
And it's not okay. But the question is, how do you, it is legal. How do you,
Not necessarily so.
Well-
That's an interpretation.
well, I have done a lot of reviews of Colorado laws. And you can have a long gun, open carry in Colorado. And so, why do you guys think it's not legal? I mean, I'd love to hear your feelings about
Well,
it, because
there's a Colorado statute.
You can use, as a cop, you have discretion. Discretion is your most valuable tool, and it also drives leaders crazy in law enforcement organizations because it can get you in trouble. And they try to minimize discretion as best as possible. You can use your discretion to help or hurt situations. I'll give you an example. We'll just use this guy for a great example. He has the right, yes, open carry. He can carry a rifle, according to the new interpretation of the silly Second Amendment. Carry a assault rifle in town. Well, the capabilities of that assault rifle, I know as a police officer, because I've shot tens of thousands of rounds through them, as also as a Marine. They are extremely dangerous weapons. Therefore, if somebody has a visceral emotional reaction, as in they're scared of that gun, it's a legitimate fear, especially what's going on with all the shootings. There is a law that says, if specifically states, can you find that for me?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for while you were talking. There we go.
Oh, I know.
This one,
No, that's the one.
one before that. Okay, let me put in.
So there is the constitutional right to carry a gun, but there's also the constitutional obligation to keep our places safe, our public spaces safe. Okay. And that's where we can use the Constitution for good. I mean, it's just insane why we want to allow, because this guy is a white supremacist. He's a Nazi. He has Nazi stuff all over his page. You can use the law to help you. He can carry his gun everywhere else, not downtown, because it scares people, legitimately so. Those are public order crimes. Every state has public order crimes. And a specific, here's the specific example, which is honestly, when we write these things, we're trying to give you, as well as our leaders, the tools to help us.
I apologize, it's in a different one. What I did do is call the city administrator, Christy Dune, who's the interim city administrator, and asked her if the city would be so good as to get a legal opinion from the city attorneys. And that has not been handed to us yet, but I was the one who called and said, give us a legal opinion to take it out of the realm of the police department interpretation
Okay.
into a legal opinion.
So here's the actual Colorado revised statute of disorderly conduct. A statute, there are certain statutes that cops love to use as far as their catch-alls. In my case as a state trooper, it was careless driving. You can use that almost in anything. It has a very low burden of proof, if everybody knows what that means. So we would use that very often when we couldn't find another statute to use. Again, discretion. You can use it to your benefit. So if somebody was being very difficult for me to do my job and investigate a crash, I'll charge them with everything I could charge them with. But if they're being respectful and kind, I'm going to charge them with as little as possible, but still accomplish the job. That's what discretion is. And these guys can do that. Read this statute.
Done
Did I get
actually
the wrong
several
one?
stories on this, yeah.
Ah,
That's Elliot.
well, that's.
Um,
So here it is, and this is in our article, and yes, she's right, we should probably stay on that topic. But this is a very important thing that we gotta understand. The police work for us. They do, and we gotta remember that, and they need to make sure that they know that. Because they've been the apple of the community's eye for a long time, and we need them now to turn around. Anyway, so disorderly conduct is a statute, like I said, a catch-all, but it's also it doesn't deal specifically with guns. It has nothing to do with gun control, which is usually what a lot of these folks get all wound up about. It is the mention of a firearm in that statute is one part of a very large statute that outlines all kinds of disorderly conduct that affects public decency, public order, and those are very important. So not being a peace officer displays a real or simulated firearm. That is straight up what is going on. I mean, it's really simple. And that's why it's frustrating for me as a former police officer to see even my friends, which I considered them, not trying to use this to help other people that are alarmed and scared. Displays a real or simulated firearm, displays any article used in fashion or manner to cause a person reasonably believe that that article is a firearm, or represents verbally otherwise that he or she is armed with a firearm in a public place in a manner calculated to alarm and does alarm another person. That has nothing to do with his ability to carry that gun somewhere. That has everything to do with your and my fear of it, which is legitimate. Do we understand the difference and why that's so key and important?
And the disinformation here is the myth that nothing can be done.
There we go. You brought it right back.
That
Correct.
is,
It is a myth. It is
Yeah,
a myth.
it's a myth that nothing can be done.
Stay
Something can
tuned.
be done.
we'll be covering this. It's being done on purpose. Normalizing violence and that kind of behavior. It's getting us all used to the idea so that we back off and are.
Where we go?
Thank you. Stephen, have you ever read the book? You would have loved it. Have you?
Time when you still have COVID, but you can't give it to somebody.
Thank you, Jan and Stephen from Ark Valley Voice and Truth Has a Voice Foundation.